I love what Meg is doing. Meg from Whidbey Island. I think I'm going to change mine to say Justine from Kirkridge. I don't know if other people find that helpful or not.
I'm doing it the same too.
How easy is that to do?
Fairly.
Well, you just did it. You just did it.
Yeah.
If you hover your mouse over your
Ah,
name in the participants panel, you can
right.
rename yourself.
Mine says more in order to do it, but
Yeah.
Mm.
Oh, I like that you put your geography too. That I always want to ask people, sometimes I do, just because it helps to have a sense of everyone coming together. Like, where are you right now?
I know someone from Whidbey Island too, from way over here in Florida. My husband had a friend called Render Denson, Meg, and he did a lot of naturalist work.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. He used to sit out to try to make sure the ecology was safe. He'd sit out in a couple of days and watch the bird life and make sure it wasn't going to get harmed by the development.
Yeah.
I think this might be close to everyone. I wanted to give a few minutes to get people in the door.
Just a heads up. I'm gonna have to bail out at the 1 hour mark to take a previous commitment, but I'll go quietly.
Not kicking and screaming.
Well, I think that's a great, I see people come and go, and Ben, maybe you want to talk about where they find the resources if they can't make the full call.
Sure, we were just speaking about that a moment ago. I've been trying to post the recordings and related documents from all these calls in our blog on the website. So if you have to leave and you want to see how that conversation resolved, or if you missed a whole call and it looked like a topic that was interesting, feel free to check back at the website. I'm hoping that it's easy to jump. There's like a button at the bottom of the blog posts where you can go to get more notes and audio recordings and other things. So I'm hoping that's simple for people. Let me know if you're having trouble accessing something. Oh, good. A couple more folks. Sister Jane and Kitty. And there's Paul.
How are you?
Yeah, great.
Hello, everyone.
Just waving across the grid. We have a couple new folks here on the call today, so I will give just a little background about what we're doing, and then I'll introduce Sue, and we'll kind of get into some conversation. These are our weekly community calls, still having some discussion about how long they'll continue to be weekly, because this has been a lot and difficult for some folks to connect as much as they'd like. But we also really want to have the resources available, and these conversations are a resource in themselves. Oh, good. Welcome more folks. Hello, Millicent and Christine. The last three calls have been more heart-centered, trying to hold space for all the processing that we're doing in our spaces and with our staffs and with our guests that we miss. So this call is a little bit of a pivot from that. This is going to be a little bit more head-centered. And for that, I'm excited. I've been following some of the work that Sue and other folks at Sacred Design Lab have been doing through the help of Michelle at Fetzer. She passed on some early reports that got my wheels turning in all kinds of new directions. And so being able to have Sue on this call is like a huge geek out moment for me. So maybe it will be for you too. If folks have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat so we can keep kind of a running dialogue going and we don't lose track of the thoughts that we're having or the kind of highlights that are coming out for people. And if you're having trouble going in and out of the breakout groups, we're going to do several of those. I'll be in the middle kind of sending people and bringing them back. So feel free to send me a private message if you need help with something. I'm hoping that most of us have done Zoom a bit lately, unfortunately, whether we wanted to or not. Anything else that I missed, Justine? No? Okay. So, Sue Phillips, welcome. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to talk about.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. How you doing? Doing all right out there? Yay. Thank you for the hand motions. We all know that one of the downsides of this video conference is that it can be hard to feel as connected as we want. And I really hope that we connect not just in the head, but also in the heart in this conversation. And anything you want to do to just let me know that you're out there, amens, unmute yourself, chuckle out loud, wave your hands, whatever you like to do would be fabulous. I'm so delighted to join you today, partly because I would not literally be where I am without retreat centers in my life over the course of my development as a religious and spiritual leader. The Genesis Center in Westfield, Massachusetts, and the Priory here, a Benedictine retreat center just outside of Olympia, Washington, have been so important to me as both sources of programming, but really sources of respite and comfort and hospitality, not to mention the witness of the people who live in those places. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you do, for the untold thousands of people who have crossed your thresholds and received your care. It really matters. It really, really matters what you do. So I'm especially delighted to be here with you. Also, let me just give a shout to Michelle and Megan from Fetzer, also without whom I would not be here. So we're all part of the Fetzer family, as it were, and I'm just delighted to be spending this time with you. So thanks a lot. The last thing I would say is that I work at Sacred Design Lab with my colleagues Casper Turk Kyle and Angie Thurston. And without Casper and Angie, I would also not be here. So they are here in spirit, and to the extent that I have wisdom to share, it is their wisdom as well. So let's just conjure the colleagues and the cloud of witnesses. So one of the questions that Sacred Design Lab is absolutely obsessed with is how to unlock wisdom from the greatest distribution system for meaning making in the history of the world, which we think are religious institutions, and deliver it in fresh new ways to people who need it in this day and age. So that is how we spend all of our time. All of our thinking, all of our reading, all of our client work is all geared towards trying to deliver this ancient wisdom in brand new ways. One of the shorthands that we use, and it's a little bit inartful, but it may be helpful frame for our conversation today, is that we think that the distribution system for that ancient wisdom is kind of broken, but the content is great. So I'm just going to play with those two concepts to try to differentiate the content of what we all in some ways are organized to deliver from the way we deliver it. Because I don't have to tell you, these can be two different things. Of course, in retreat centers, you try to knit them together, and that's really important and God knows valuable. But we're going to try to just differentiate a little bit for the sake of this conversation. Does that make sense? I'm getting some nods. Thank you for the feedback. So it kind of goes without saying, we are just in a situation of extremis. This is such a nutty time, isn't it? I mean, we all feel it in our bodies. We see it around us. We are desperately trying to figure out how our business model works in COVID times. We're trying to reassess what we do and how we do it through the lens of white supremacy to understand whether we're being faithful and having integrity to our deepest values. I mean, this is an amazing swirl of challenges and opportunities in this moment. So hopefully we're going to find some balance in this call between the challenge part and the opportunity part, because I feel like there are some real opportunities for retreat centers right now, and I'm sure you do too. So we'll have a chance to unlock some of those. I like to think about this moment as just as a lifelong justice warrior. There's virtually nothing else that I can think of that ever could have happened globally that has been so disruptive as what is happening right now. This is a magnificent thing, because what we know is that disruption increases the sense of urgency people feel for change. And I'm convinced that a lot of those that sense of urgency is people feel in their own individual bodies. And that needs a place to be held and to be nurtured, to be grown and to be applied. And I think retreat centers are a great place to carry that disruption, especially in the aftermath as people begin to transition. So I think this is such a juicy time. And I mean, who could have ever made such a world for us to thrive in as what's been happening these last few months? So that's the frame I'm going to really think about this as an opportunity for your work to thrive in new ways. Although I'm sure at least a part of every one of y'all's brains is thinking, she's crazy. This is a catastrophe. And we can hold those two things side by side, right? What is it a hymn or a scripture verse that says joy and woe are woven fine? Something like that. We're gonna like occupy that space today. So I am going to talk about trends, but really this is not an intellectual exercise. I have a real conviction that if we try to read the future, we're better prepared to deal with it. So that's why we talk about trends. It's not an intellectual exercise. It's like, let us make way for what wants to emerge. And I think the real another opportunity of the moment is that we can see what's emerging very clearly. There's a sense of acceleration of some of the trends we already knew were unfolding. And so we're going to identify what some of those are. And we're going to talk about what the implications are for your work. Doesn't that sound fun? That's not just boring stuff. That's like where it's at, friends. So hopefully we'll get to play together. Thanks, Megan. Appreciate your enthusiasm over there in Kalamazoo. Are you in Grand Rapids or Kalamazoo? Yeah, all right. Excuse me, as I'm looking down at notes because I'm a Gen Xer, so I have to print everything out. That's what I'm doing as I look down. Okay, as I move into talking about some of the trends, I do want you to consider what I think is a really important challenge/question. So just like overlay this question on the entire discussion today. I want you to think about the difference between need and market. Now, I am occasionally going to use some business language in this conversation because I think it provides some frames for those of us who work in the nonprofit world in a way that can be helpful. So once again, I want you to think about the difference between the need for something and the market for something. So obviously the need is, there's a huge need for affordable housing, undeniable in every community. At the same time, there's not always a market for affordable housing because there's a mismatch between what is offered and what people want to consume. So the need can be great, but when there's a gap between what people want and what we're delivering to them, that is a market problem, okay? And I want us to think in those terms because I suspect that this is an underlying challenge for retreat centers right now. I'm gonna pause for one moment and ask, does this make sense? Does that frame make sense? Does anybody have any questions? You can, I think, Ben, do people have permission to unmute to ask questions? Yeah, so feel free, or you can ask them in the chat. Market and need, we got it? All right, Paul, thanks for the thumbs up. Everybody, oh, you're so cute. Thanks, everyone. Whew, so many words I've spoken already. I'm gonna get big to give myself some energy for this part. Okay, trend number one. First of all, I don't know how many of you have actually had a chance to look at the PDF that Ben sent along, but don't worry. Oh, some of you have, that's great. If you haven't, don't worry. We're gonna cover all that stuff. Okay, trend number one, meaning takes center stage. We at Sacred Design Lab, and I'm sure many of you have noticed in the last 3 or 4 months, the bizarre extremities of this moment have brought out a lot of really good things in people. There's just stories everywhere about people showing up for their neighbors, about community solidarity, about bringing people groceries and writing sidewalk art, people putting signs in their windows. I'm sure you've seen this all around you, right? In fact, probably many of you are the instigators of such joy and connection and loving kindness in neighborhoods around you. I think the question that we've been given over and over again is what is essential. The whole category of essentialness has entered the cultural lexicon. Who are essential workers? What are essential goods? So this is a tremendous opportunity for us to flag, because whenever people ask what is essential, we know that they're asking about the soul. They're asking about what matters most. And this is a gap we can step into as retreat centers and spiritual leaders. So when meaning takes center stage, people are asking different kinds of questions. This is very much into the heart of what we do and the spaces we try to create for people in which they can ask those questions. So what we have found from just talking to not quite hundreds of people, many, many people, and reading accounts of what is happening, what we find is that there are countless stories of people discovering what matters most to them. And also at the same time, an awareness of the lack of places to go for support and encouragement and comfort. I'm going to talk a little later about the impact of religious disaffiliation on these trends. But what I think we're noticing is people are feeling the need, and they're noticing that they don't have a lot of resources to address that need. And whenever there's a gap like that, there's a market for that. So when there's a gap between the need and where people know to get that need addressed or satisfied, that's an opportunity for those of us in the sort of caring space to take note of. Does that make sense so far? Of course, you've noticed this yourselves. I mean, you all know all the things I'm sharing. I'm just trying to put them together in digestible ways. So meaning takes center stage. We also find, as related to this, that there's amazing openness to new spiritual practices. Springtide Research has done a very interesting study. I encourage you to go to look. Maybe Megan or Ben or Justine or Michelle could just post a link to Springtide Research's website. They found that 46% of young adults have tried a new spiritual practice since COVID began. This is a remarkable number, and it's something we've never seen before. Certainly openness to newness, but that the rapid move towards seeking out spiritual practices, which, by the way, were very broadly defined. They weren't like just prayer, text study. They were also singing together, connecting with an elder, and some other opportunities like that. One more thing I want to mention before we actually start some discussion about this trend is the difference between the need for meaning and the need for purpose. So I want to differentiate for 1 second meaning and purpose. What we know from trauma response experts, including in my case, the article that really opened my eyes was from the pastor of one of the largest congregations in Newtown, Connecticut, the site of the Sandy Hook shootings. And he very eloquently talks about the need in the immediate aftermath of trauma for people to know what their role is. They want to know what their purpose is. They want to know what they're supposed to do and how they can contribute. I'm going to call that purpose. He says that meaning making doesn't really happen in the immediate aftermath of trauma and emergencies. Meaning happens a little bit later when we have a little more distance. We begin to ask ourselves, not just sort of what happened, but what does it mean? And how do I integrate this new awareness about myself and the world as a result? I think this is important for us, especially if we see cycles, pandemic cycles, or other social disruption. Purpose, people are actually not in a meaning-making space in the midst of extremity. They need to know their role, and that could have implications for programming. So the trend we're naming meaning takes center stage, but with that nuance of purpose really being the heart of the work in the immediate face of weird times. Does that resonate with you guys? You're feeling that too, yeah. I recognize that in myself. Thank you, Megan, for posting the Springtide study. As we begin to understand the market for retreat centers, data like the Springtide research could be helpful to you because it's exposing untapped market potential. Okay, so Ben, I'm going to look to you. Let's see, we have 24 people. We want to do some small group discussion. So our vision is that we're going to talk about I'm going to talk about each trend, and then we're going to spend maybe 10 minutes in small groups. Actually, let's make it 8, Ben. 8 minutes or so in small groups, so you guys can talk about what the implications are for retreat centers. And then we're going to come back as a large group. Does that sound all right? Because I'm sure you want to see and talk to each other too. So I'm going to actually type the questions in the chat box, which you should have access to even in your small groups. So let me tell you what those are. How might you take advantage of this new impulse for meaning and purpose? That's question number 1. So you as a leader of a retreat center, how might you take advantage of people's impulse for purpose and meaning? And then the second question is, how would people know to recognize themselves in the invitations you offer to deal with meaning and purpose? So how do people know to say yes to the invitations you are issuing into this meaning and purpose space? So I'm going to write those in the chat. You'll carry them with you. Ben's going to put you, but please not me, in small groups. And then we're going to come back in 8 minutes and talk briefly about what we learned. Sound good?
Sue, I just plopped them in the chat room.
Oh, well, thanks, Justine. I appreciate it. Okay, friends, we'll see you in a few minutes. Enjoy the conversation.
And we're off.
Hi, Ben.
Hi, I think that worked. I'm going back to check that the numbers are right. Yes, all groups of 4 and 5. Excellent.
Great. Now do whatever you want. I'm going to just check out my notes and stuff in between.
Okay. I will pause the recording.
Amanda. Hola, Emily.
Welcome back, everyone. Did you enjoy talking to one another? It's always the best part, isn't it? Ben, I think we should do a quick pivot. I think going into breakout rooms after every question is going to take too much time. So what I'd like to do is go through the trends and then give people a little more time to connect with each other before we come back in a large group. Thumbs up? Okay. Oh, thank you. So participatory. Appreciate it. Okay, so we just talked about meaning taking center stage, and now we're going to talk about the fact that traditional pathways to religious life are breaking down. Now, first of all, let me say that I know that or at least I think that many/some of you do not work at religiously affiliated retreat centers, and I totally hear that. I'm also assuming that most retreat centers have some kind of meaning, purpose, personal exploration type programming. So I want you to hear when I use the word religious or spiritual, I'm still talking about you, just using my own language to describe both the content of what you deliver and how you deliver it, and also the spirit with which you do it. So we can have like a wonderful theological debate another day about how appropriate that is, but I don't want you to feel yourself excluded by my using sort of religious reference points. So I just want to share that with you. I just don't want you to hear that you're out of it. Okay, most of us know about the trend, the very broad trend towards religious disaffiliation in the United States. Most of us are familiar with the stats that show membership in traditional religious institutions declining, often very dramatically, and the not only attendance and sort of membership in a traditional way, but also in, especially among millennials and Gen Y or Gen Zers, in whether they claim as a part of their identity anything related to their religious or spiritual lives. So there's this disaffiliation trend is not being a member or an everyday attendee or every week attendee of some religious tradition. But we're also seeing huge increases in unaffiliated people. These are two very different categories that often get confused. Disaffiliation is really about people who used to have an affiliation that they have, for some reason, left. And unaffiliation or non-affiliation is people, generally speaking, people who never had a religious community. And what we're seeing rise up, not surprisingly, is growing numbers of non-affiliated people. And one of the implications of that, Sacred Design Lab and many, many, many others believe, is that there are vast swaths, especially of younger generations, who literally don't know where to find resources to help them grow their souls. They don't have those reference points. They don't know clergy people. They're not buddies with their rabbi. They don't have a history of doing Shabbat on Friday nights. They don't know hymns to sing when they're sorrowful and don't have a place to go. They don't have sacred texts to return to for comfort and contemplation, and on and on and on. So this is I'm going to speak broadly, but this trend hints that upcoming generations are really bereft of the resources that many elders have. Even if they have walked away from them, older generations tend to know those things are out there. So now we've got this vast numbers of people, hundreds of millions of people in the United States alone, who don't have these reference points, and I would claim need them badly. This is, obviously you can see where I'm going with this, and you already know this. This is an opportunity for retreat centers to step in. Meanwhile, we've got the situation, and again, this is editorial content, but since I'm on camera, I get to say what I think. Religious institutions are doing what I would characterize as a terrible job at virtual engagement. So we've got the problem of sort of delivering relevance in this day and age writ large, but then we've also got the problem, especially in COVID times, the vast majority of religious communities are just doing a terrible job at virtual engagement. They're just filming the things they used to do live and plonking it on Facebook and Instagram and live streaming it. And it just doesn't tend to work very well, right? Especially if you're not already a member of the community where you can get joy just from seeing people's faces that you already know. So there's this real disconnect between the way that known delivery systems of that kind of engagement are engaging people now versus what people need. There's also some real significant theological challenges embedded in all this. I'll say for those of you who are religious nerds like I am, which is to say that some of the things we take for granted about where the source of strength and succor come from, like the sacraments, the thread between the sacramental thread is broken when people cannot be in person to give and receive some sacraments, because there's no adaptation that has been authorized for the delivery of those things when people are not in person. Like, can you hear confession virtually? This is a real debate. I see some nods. It's a real debate about whether that's even possible. So even some of and of course, sacraments are required in a lot of traditions, and people are not able to appropriately access what is required of them as faithful people in these COVID times. So again, there's just another way of naming this disconnect between content and delivery. Also, meanwhile, we're seeing religious communities of all kinds closing at an unprecedented rate. Something like, oh gosh, I'm going to get the stat wrong. I want to say something like 10,000 congregations, Christian congregations, close every year. You know, the vast majority of congregations are very small. We tend to like notice mega churches and not the smaller churches. But so this trend existed long before COVID and the Black Lives Matter, newest surfacing of Black Lives Matter movement existed long before all of that. But the financial exigencies mean that there's no offering plates. The in-person appeals and so much of the structure of raising money for those places is diminishing. So consequently, I think we're going to see a massive acceleration of closing local congregations of all kinds. And I'm not just talking about Christian ones. Lots of religious communities, of course, facing a lot of the pressures that you yourselves are facing. So the question that this gives us, the question I would have asked you in a small group, but you might want to carry with you for later, is if 3 or 4 of every congregation of all congregations in your immediate area closed in the next 5 years, what opportunities would be available to you as a retreat center? I think this is a very real scenario. Kitty, did you want to jump in? No, okay. Okay.
Sue, are you seeing, I'm sorry, hi Sue, my name is Margarita. Are you seeing, do you have a live example of that? Have you seen it where the congregations in a community have closed and retreat centers are impacted or respond? No.
I haven't, but I do want to say I haven't looked at any data that way to look at like growth, because I mean, anyway, I don't know is the short answer, but here's another data point. I mean, a good friend of our project who works at the United Church of Christ, which is one of the largest, especially mainline sort of progressive Christian traditions, estimates that 1/3 of their churches will close in the next 5 years. That's an extraordinary number. And I'm sure, I am Unitarian Universalist myself, and I'm sure that our numbers are very similar. And the ones that don't actually close will be this close to closing. So I think that is going to happen. And I thought, frankly, that those trends we were on track for those trends even before COVID hit. So, all right, let's talk about the next trend, which is community can be home-based. The number of people who are intentionally convening their people seems greater than ever before during COVID, right? How many of us are on Zoom calls with groups of people we had not gathered with before COVID? Whether it's our extended families, it's our college roommates, it's our Jewish summer camp posse that was supposed to get together this summer. More and more of that is happening, and people are creating weird mixes of their people. Folks that they might actually not have taken the time to follow up with. This moment has sort of given us extra fuel to make those connections. And what's more, we realize we can connect with people at home, even if we're sad that we can't connect with them in what is that called? Person. So there is this sense of reaching out to folks and just kind of convening people in some fresh new ways. I'm just trying to look at what level of detail. So I also think there are new definitions for what it means to be in person. We used to think we knew what that meant, right? We used to think in person meant we were physically in the same space. But we're seeing some erosion of what it means to be in person, especially with the proliferation of video conference technology, which a lot of people outside of professional environments didn't know about and didn't have access to, especially generationally. So for a lot of folks who are kind of streaming into Zoom and similar interfaces, they actually experience video conference where you can see people to be in person in a way that this never was. So part of this trend is teasing open a little bit about what in-person means. And related to that, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, is how deep one can go in person in this way. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But meanwhile, community can be home-based. So during COVID times, people's connections with one another are hyper local. So I don't know about you, I'm in my office, in my house. Many of you are in your living rooms, you're in your kitchens, you're in your basements. You are, in fact, in your house while we're connecting. This opens up a whole new opportunity for sort of intimacy, if you will, because I'm not in my office in Cambridge. I'm in my office at home. It's hyper local. At the same time, this gathering is translocal. So this amazing combination of hyper locality, I'm in my house, you're presumably in yours, and we're also all around the country. So these two things are existing in the same time. That's something you can't do in person. There's only hyper local. So we get to try to get the best of both worlds, which means that for retreat centers, the sense of who you might have access to has just exploded exponentially. Because now you have access to everyone everywhere when you offer virtual connections. I'm sure that feels overwhelming to many of you, and I'm sure many of you already did online things. So essentially, we've been liberated from the confines of physical space. There's also grief and loss there that I absolutely want to acknowledge, but we have been liberated in a way. And I think it's important to explore what that liberation could really look like for what you are offering. The question I would give to you, just to make note of and carry with you, is what can you do and deliver right now that you couldn't before? And to whom? I just want to give our ears a break. Am I a fast talker? I feel like I'm talking. Michelle, you just have to kick me under the proverbial table if I'm talking too fast, okay? She will, as you have told me before. Another trend, you ready? This is number, I think it's 4. Spiritual leadership is deprofessionalizing. What does this mean? We are seeing countless examples of new forms of spiritual leadership. Leadership that tends to be unauthorized, uncredentialed, untrained, and in many cases unformed. Also, free from the constraints of some traditional religious leadership to say yes to a personal calling, to convene other people around what matters most. Lots of people are stepping into this community building space. They're the ones who are getting their groups of, not just their personal friends, but other groups together. They're the ones who are convening COVID Zoom choirs of people around the globe, or convening family chapel, a sort of secular spiritual service for half an hour every noon time. People are stepping into leadership who would never be authorized in formal ways. Those of us who are formally authorized religious leaders have many little warning signs about, whenever we give access to people without accountability, there's an opportunity, just to be shitty at it. Yeah. Sorry, that's a term of art in my work. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Just to be bad at it on the one hand, and also, maybe to not have good boundaries and, there's safety issues. But the number of people who can say yes to some sense of call to build community are able to access that in a new way. And I think that's really exciting. And this was a trend long before COVID hit that we have been Sacred Design Lab has been actively engaged in. For those of you who have read How We Gather, one of our early monographs, you'll recognize what I'm about to say, which is that leaders in younger generations especially, who are unauthorized, but who nonetheless feel some sort of call to leadership, are absolutely desperate for access to spiritual formation, to a community of peers who are also leading communities, to elders, to witness and accompaniment from people who know what they're doing. The market among these emerging leaders is huge for the content that many of you deliver by nature. I want to suggest that this sort of emerging unauthorized spiritual leaders of upcoming generations has a different set of needs than those of you who are highly focused on serving individuals for individual retreats. These are folks that actually don't have a community of peers. This is one of the benefits of traditional religious leadership, as so many of you know, is that it gives us colleagues. There's other sisters, there's other clergy people, other rabbis who we know to recognize, we know we share a common experience, and we know to meet together. I think this class of leaders, unauthorized, emergent spiritual leaders, it needs entities to bring them together to form communities of them. And I think retreat centers are uniquely poised to do it because by definition, these folks don't have places to do that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. One more, and then we'll actually open this up for some conversation. It's something that I'm sure you all have already sensed, and that is that virtual connection can be surprisingly meaningful. When when COVID first started happening, I have a very small family. We have 5 people in it. Thank God my parents are still alive in their early 80s. We all live in we're spread out over every time zone in the mainland United States. And my mom called me like a week after our first family Zoom call and said, I had no idea how connected I feel to you kids using Zoom, which she had always resisted, despite the fact that as professionals, our kids are on it all the time. She just had no clue at how valuable that time and that connection could be with the video interface. And in a way, this experience has been amplified just hundreds of thousands of times as people are like, wow, you really can have meaningful small groups via Zoom and other interfaces. This is not to say that it is the same as in-person small groups, but it can be meaningful. And of course, the challenge then is to create containers that are appropriate for online environments in which we translate so much of what you all do at such a high level, which is to set aside space and time. It's to create a physical environment with artifacts that help people to make meaning, how to ask the right questions and to facilitate in ways that deepen meaning online is a whole other set of skills. But you have ancillary skills that are directly applicable. And of course, the challenge there is how do you do that translating? Okay, I'm gonna stop talking now. We have, let's see, about 35, 40 more minutes together. So what I would love to do now is actually hear from you. What questions do you have? What are you excited about? Let's stop there. Questions, excitements, questions for each other. Let's have it. And Ben, can I ask you to sort of call on people and host the conversation? I'll be here as a resource.
Why, sure, I'd be happy to do that. Who's got a question? Kitty, do you want to start us?
I really appreciate your words, and I will eventually come along. I think it's taken me a while to shift, that I don't think of myself as a pivot personality. And what I've loved about my retreat center is the incredible diversity of people that come here to do their work, and we support them. So that diversity of coming here and being together that we do really well in this physical space. And now you're telling me that that's not going to be the priority going forward and we need to shift. And I've been hearing that from lots of places recently more and more. And so, yes, I guess I'm wondering what you just said about those special skills of how to do it effectively online and reaching out. I'm wondering, maybe that's something that Ben and others from RCC, this collaborative, can suggest of where to go for those resources, because I am not real experienced with trying to do that online.
Kitty, I really hear the loss behind some of these assertions. And I really don't want you to hear me say that in-person gathering is over and will never come back. In fact, I have some ideas about how to really maximize some in-person gathering, which I'll share at the very end. I do want to say that there are some people doing some really excellent work about online ritual design in particular, which I will follow up with Ben to share some links with him, because I think I know that some of you in your work actually do formal rituals, but ritual as a design category, you know, like leading people through an intentional experience, that's another way of describing ritual, is applicable probably to what all of you do. So we'll get you some good resources. We have a 5 principles for online ritual leadership too, which I'll send to Ben. Hopefully that will be helpful. Oh, and look, Fetzer Institute coming through with some resources as well. Who else?
Hi, Sue. It's Margarita again. My question is, those people that you see that may be emerging that are not credentialed, and do you see that as an opportunity, or do you see those individuals as almost spiritual entrepreneurs? And I mean, that's the feeling that I've been getting. And I think I'm finding, and I don't know if that's what you're saying, that what I see is missing is the roots, the grounding, the authentic, you know, how is it that somebody has the authority perhaps to be able to say, I didn't know that sound, I don't know even like how that sounds, but I don't know. We have some here that we're experiencing that I'm just like questioning and trying to challenge myself to say, maybe it's okay, you know. So can you comment on that a little bit? I mean, do you find that there is this essential lack of roots, that they're looking also for a place to root themselves, or?
Oh, I so appreciate your questions. I have them too. We think we've noticed a couple of different categories of leaders in this space. One, and we've gathered hundreds and hundreds of these people over the years, and there's a big swath of them, probably about a third is our guess, who are like they're the babies of Uber practitioners. So these are the kids who like went to Jewish summer camp every summer, who did their youth group, who went to confirmation. They were like really into their family's religious tradition, and then they left it. They left the tradition, but there's still these like really well-formed, well-grounded people that know a lot about their tradition. So something like a third are in that category. They have very different needs than the other 2/3 who don't have that grounding. So what they have is a sense that there's this need in the world and in myself, and I am called to try to do something in that space. And again, I'll use the word bereft of connections to that. So that I do think, Margarita, that those are folks who I might call ungrounded. And also unformed. And unformed leaders can be magnificent in their charisma and even in their charism, but they don't know that it's been transmitted or who has transmitted it to them and how to carry that lineage. They're disconnected from ancestry, from teachers, and from peers, which is obviously a huge problem. I mean, a huge problem that manifests in some ugly everyday ways. So I would say to think about those two groups at once might be helpful as you kind of figure out how to interact with these groups of folks. But to offer formation, to my mind, that's the first thing I would do. When I've met with these groups, and Michelle has been on many of these gatherings, when we offer the frame of spiritual formation to these leaders who have never heard of it before, literally they cry. Because they didn't know there was a thing that could help them grow in the ways they are desperate to grow in. And that is something we have to offer them. Isn't that beautiful? Mm-hmm. So it's like they discover the birthright gifts of our ancestors and our communities and traditions that they might be for them too.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question. I'm Orlando. I'm from Commonweal, about an hour north of San Francisco. I know Angie and Casper. I'm wondering if you're seeing a difference between the West Coast, at least the Bay Area, and kind of the more traditional parts of the country, because it is true there's a lot of spiritual emergence here that's not affiliated with the older Abrahamic traditions. You know, there's reasons why those traditions are not being accepted by the more progressive communities, by communities whose heritage is not necessarily in those. And that's pushing a lot of people into kind of new ritual space. I'm trying to think, other than weddings that my rabbi husband does, I don't know a couple that has been married in a church in 20 years. So I'm just wondering if you're seeing that kind of difference. And I'm also curious about how those, have you seen any changes in the last month since George Floyd was murdered? And is there an awakening to other kinds of lineages and spiritualities? Millicent is on the call with me. We've been exploring this question deeply in a project that is forming as we speak, and struggling with how do we propose a new lineage that's not the Abrahamic one, but at the same time respecting kind of each of our own stories, right? I feel really comfortable with the music and the ritual in the synagogue. I have a problem with the origin story. I have a problem with some of the older commandments that are no longer relevant. So how do we propose a new lineage that then will lead to new ritual and new spaces, whether virtual or not? Millicent, is there anything you want to add? Putting you on the spot?
I guess what I would say is I think what's called for now is a integrated and elegant whole that doesn't diminish any of the truths of where we come from and who we are as people. And so often the dominant ways of gathering, of having ritual, of transmitting religion have been to have one story fall away and all of our identities that don't fit in that story fall away to belong. And I think, so the question is really, how do you take, I love the inheritance of our ancestors and of traditions, and honor them in their context while also creating newness.
And what are the somatics of virtual spaces? Like all the things we know that are vital for people to connect on that deep level. There's so many questions. I can't answer the questions that you all have just asked. I consider them to be awesome sort of rhetorical questions for now, almost discernment questions. I do know that the shape that entrepreneurial leadership has taken varies coast to coast. It also varies by rurality and by urbanness and access to numbers of people. Lower access, usually higher degree of contemplation. Higher access to numbers, usually more about gathering and celebrating, the kind of more extroverted connections. But I wouldn't want to speculate beyond that. Oh, I'm sorry, other than to put a big old flag in the question of appropriation when dabbling in tradition, which is just that is its own kind of pandemic in unaffiliated people who are trying stuff on. So I just want to name that as a vital question of integrity, but also an important step for beginners to try stuff on. And the question, of course, is, can we nurture environments in which people can be exposed to the wisdom from other traditions, which when you're unaffiliated is everything. And how can we do that with integrity? Thank you, Oren and Millicent, for your questions.
I see Mary there. Go ahead, Mary.
Yeah, thanks. One thing I noticed was, what I've been noticing is a lot of scientific backing of some of the newer spiritual programming that's out there, and online programming, as they'll say, like, scientifically researched through Stanford, or, whatever. And it'll be like, our meditation, organization is doing this, and it's based in this research. So, but I think we can, but it's good. I mean, it's exciting that all this research that we've been doing in science and using science, we can use that to bolster the experience that we already have, and say, yeah, we can work hand in hand with science, and we're not afraid of that. So, but that's one thing I've noticed, that a lot of people are basing their background, whether it's in psychology or, research or neuropsychology, cognitive psychology, anything like that.
Other folks with some thoughts here, letting that simmer.
Michelle, dive.
No, I just have a question for the group, because as you were sharing these different trends, Sue, I started ruminating on what are the possibilities for programming that would be responsive to these trends. And one of the things that I have found amazing about this time and learning from this group is, like Kirkridge has shared, and Justine, you can correct me if I get this wrong, that people have been joining virtual programming who would never come to the retreat center. And because, for financial reasons or health reasons, travel, whatever it might be. And that feels like a huge opportunity to me. So what I'm hearing in your comments, Sue, has to do with people's needs during this time. And I think it's, it is a calling to how can we step up to meet those needs. So I'm just wondering if others hear that as well, and what kinds of opportunities it might open up.
Well, I'll share one opportunity that is going to be offered to RCC, which is our Healing Circles training is going to be offered for free to anybody that's part of the Retreat Center Collaborative. And this is an effort that exactly demonstrated what Michelle was talking about. It was a program that was in 5 geographic locations across the country, and has expanded. I mean, I don't even know if it's quadrupled the 5 times or 6 times. But these are circles that started as circles for people living with cancer and have exploded to grief circles, circles of isolation, and now moving into circles, some for, there's a variety of different structures that are going online. And we're going to be offering a training for anybody who's part of the Retreat Center Collaborative. I think Ben has those details. And that definitely is work that had reached 300 people and now is reaching hundreds.
Right. So we're hoping to get that scheduled starting in July for like 3 consecutive weeks, where it would just be one afternoon each week. And it would be a training that would enable you to start a healing circle at your center or facilitate one online yourself. Or, yeah, I mean, the ripple effect is extraordinary. We don't have those scheduled yet. We're still working on it.
I just wanted to say I participated and they were wonderful, well facilitated, authentic spaces. And thank you, Michelle, for raising up Kirkridge for a moment. I see a lot of opportunity in these trends. One, I think we've had about 1,000 people in 60 programs over the last 3 months, which is, we had 230 touch points last year alone. So just, it's skyrocketed. Many are new, but we noticed that our communities were lonely. They were isolated. And Kirkridge was a place for them to go yearly. And now with our virtual programs, they can go once or twice a week. So the connection has been strong, given that they maybe weren't able to afford that. So an access and equity question. They were aging out. And they were geographically, they were just moving away. So we were able to kind of open these doors in a new way. And we were also, I think that gave us a prompt to think about, what does retreat mean? What does it look like in these times? And how do we carry that forward? Especially when retreat might not be a comfortable word for younger generations. So I'm asking the question, what are those low risk entry points that we can meet people where they're at and then invite them in?
I saw Maureen had her hand up earlier. Maureen, did you want to say something?
Yes, we're in Florida and have been closed the last 3 months and just only recently launched Zoom programs. I mentioned in my small group, we had 170 people in an hour-long conscious contact retreat from all over the country, which ordinarily our room doesn't hold more than 90 people. And then I've been offering a book club with Julia Cameron's book, and people are just amazed about the depth of her book on, I can't get over it. I've forgotten the title, but it's never too late to begin again. That's it. So the book club, I think, is something we will continue. And the people at the center on the staff are saying that these are people that haven't been able to come for years because of their health. Now, I'd love us to work with the younger demographic, but I think both being in Florida, we do attract, and the 5-session series I'm doing on deepening spirituality in the last third of life, of course, only does for a certain audience. But I'd love us to try to find ways to program more for younger people, and we haven't found a way to do that yet, because most of even our mailing list is older people.
Just a quick note, if I could, the number one need that community and spiritual leaders identified to the Sacred Design Lab team over many, many, many years after formation is connection with elders. These are folks that generally do not have vibrant intergenerational relationships, either with children or with elders. And I would suggest that something for you to consider is actually helping to connect elders with youngers. But connect, this is me editorializing, in a pastoral sense of support from the elders to the youngers, not like some sort of just friend program, but actual kind of witness type eldering. Yeah.
I see Susan and Kitty. Susan, will you go first here?
I'm feeling the tension and trusting that, you know, when there's tension, something new opens up. And the tension is between, yes, understanding the opportunities that are offered in virtual gatherings and new connections. And also, I mean, specifically for the retreat center here, it's really our land that attracts people and grounds people and teaches wisdom. It's, you know, Earth's wisdom is beyond it's beyond the different faith traditions. So it brings people together. So I don't know if others feel that tension or what it means to hold that.
Yeah, I definitely feel that tension. Chitty,
I'm sorry, I just want to jump in for 1 second and say just how hard I feel that reality, Susan. I also want to say that one of the bits of work Sacred Design Lab has been doing in the last couple of weeks is to help the Sundance Institute of Film Fame redesign their in-person, very land-based, very specific place-based rituals for online environments, which is not to say that it's the same thing or that something vital isn't lost, only that I think this is going to be a growth industry. In fact, just convening people in conversations about how to think about land and place differently in this day and age is something that the Sisters of Loretto and might be uniquely positioned to do, not because you know the answers, but because you know the troubles. I would be surprised if you can get a really robust group of people just to discuss that in ways that add value, because you're such expert facilitators and community builders. If you can create that container and give people that question, that's something in and of itself.
So my question is, if you've done any research or any sense of out there about how people are, or retreat centers are financing some of this, whether you're finding that people are willing to pay for something online. You know, I feel like in COVID time, people have been offering a lot of things for free and just getting it out there and putting it out there. And that may not be sustainable. And for retreat centers that have usually had their bread and butter paid for by groups, people that come, how, you know, are you seeing trends that mean that, you know, there will be some kind of financial something to help all these initiatives keep going? I don't know, something like that.
No, what an important question. I'm sure that your colleagues here have some thoughts too. I will share a couple of observations. One, of course, is that the business models have not caught up to these emerging trends, and not just COVID, pre-COVID deterioration of traditional delivery pathways. The whole digital model is completely different. The way that commerce happens digitally and what people pay for and don't is so different from in-person sort of retail or other gathering spaces. I do think that something that might be helpful for you is to actually do a little bit of reading about how money gets made online, because the business models are totally different. Subscription services, premium and freemium models, where you overlay some free stuff with a behind a paywall premium content, is another very well-known model. I'm not an expert in these models, but if you go looking, I'll bet it will stimulate some thoughts for you. The other thing I want to say is what so many retreat centers have going for you is that you're deeply rooted in a single place, obviously. And what really can help when the amount of money we charge for things goes down is scale, obviously, because if you can get 1,000 people to pay $10, I can't do math, but the economics are very different than if you have to get 100 people to pay $150. And so some of what I think you're going to be dealing with, and this is why I'm so glad Fetzer has brought you all together, is how to think about your movement in terms of scale and a business model to match some scalability that might make some of these business models work better for you. You may need to reach thousands of people because you can't charge enough. I'm sure others of you have thought about this very much more than I have, but there are some initial thoughts.
But it's a good idea about how we can build collaboration across retreat centers. I know Margarita has a lot of thoughts around this, but this might be an opportunity to kind of build on the sense of belonging that people have to specific physical sites, and then have them manifest in a virtual way, but collective. So, you know, we can do things across congregations, across geographies. And this might be a way for us to weather the upcoming year or two.
With trends, is there anybody working in anything with like a virtual reality retreat space or anything like that that you know of?
I don't know of
I want
virtual.
to.
You should do that. I know several people who are offering spiritual and meaning-oriented programming in virtual spaces. I don't know of anything that is a retreat center, but there are, you know, all the people I know have communities that are formed that offer various, they're more like congregations than retreat centers, but I think you're onto something, Mary. I think you could really build something there.
Mary, in some research I did right before I graduated last year from school, I did a report on different ways that people are building community. And I saw that there were some almost prayer circles that met in actual VR rooms. Like you wear the goggles and you go in and there's a whole experience inside there. It wasn't a retreat, but people are doing that already.
Okay. Well, I think it's cool that they call, when you're in virtual reality and you're having the experience, that they call that presence. And I'm like, yeah, we're all about presence. We know a lot about presence. And so I feel like there's like a signal in there somewhere that we could, you know, even collaboratively work together to explore. That would be really awesome.
Naomi, did you have your hand up?
I do. I have a couple of things to say. One, to Susan and Kitty, we've been experimenting with hybrid retreats, which is some of the people who can come. And then we meet outside, and then we have an electronic portal for people who can't be present to be with the people who are present. So we were trying to utilize that sense of place and being here for the people who can come, but also having the open conversation with the people who can't be physically here but want to be part of the group, having that experience. So that's what I wanted to say there about place. And Kitty, I don't know, I'm not in charge of the finances, but we have from the beginning, when we started to offer online retreats, just made them all by donation. And so we say, you know, here's a suggested amount that you can give us. You don't have to pay anything. You can register for this retreat and pay nothing, or you can make the donation. And we found that most people make some sort of donation for the retreat, and a lot of them will pay more than what the suggested donation listed and the retreat is. And so I don't know money-wise, like bottom line, how that's panned out, but it does help bring in some income with the retreats.
Another thought or two before I offer some final thoughts and we wrap up?
So just real quick, as far as with the collaboration that we're involved with here, one of the treasures is indeed collaboration. And I think what we're trying to discover is how are we leaning into that word a little bit more and calling ourselves the Retreat Center Collaboration. And so when you talk about scale, it may mean beyond a fee-based type of scale, where it's more scaling in terms of connection to one another in order to impact the greater good. So that I think is coming, unfolding for us as a retreat center collaboration, and seeing how we can make that possible and actually make it happen.
Let me offer a couple of other, what I think are opportunities. And in a way, a few things I can imagine, my team at Sacred Design Lab can imagine, are really about emerging categories, new categories being created out of this moment, categories of programs and entities and ways of thinking about the problems that we are devoting our lives to solving through retreat center technology, I'll call it. So in the last few weeks, we work with nonprofit clients, but we also work with a lot of for-profit clients to do this interpreting of what we call ancient technology into relevant new delivery pathways. So we do occasionally work with for-profit clients, and we've had a sort of unprecedented level of interest from tech companies. And one of the reasons why is that their own employees, including, I would say we've had conversations with at least one of the largest tech companies on the planet, who are aware of employee needs in ways that they never have been before. They're attending to the fact that their employees are suffering and at home in some really fresh ways. Can you imagine if people's spiritual well-being was a category of employee benefits in a way that is analogous to health well-being? Because employers are great at providing healthcare, great. I mean, they're crappy, but it is a known category of providing health and wellness resources. And the bigger companies have a lot of health and wellness resources. They offer stuff on site. They offer yoga rooms and yoga classes and meditation rooms. It's huge on their campuses. Can you imagine if they began offering a benefit that was related to spiritual well-being, which I think we're close to doing on some of these industry-leading organizations. And every employee, like Google, for example, is literally giving every employee, and I don't know the exact number, but it's not insubstantial, money to help make their home office environments better for them, whether it's a piece of technology or piece of art or whatever. I think in the next 5 years, we're going to see companies beginning to weave spiritual well-being into their employee benefits package. And COVID and these horrible police brutality and the protest responses to it are accelerating awareness of this category. So imagine your retreat center partners with the largest employers in your area, and you're going to solve a big problem for them, which is that they have got employees in extremis that they don't know how to help. And you are going to offer to provide programming for their employees. You're going to offer either small groups, a 5-week series on building personal resilience in difficult times. You're going to offer identity-based small groups for people of color when there's not critical mass in your Western Massachusetts retreat center. So think about partnerships that are going to be surprising, and don't undervalue the genius of the spiritual technologies you use, which is the containers you create, the questions you ask, and the way you facilitate people. People will buy that wisdom from you if you can figure out how to articulate its value in new environments. Now, does this mean every single one of you is going to have to go face the business world and corporations? Absolutely not. But I think this is a category that is really waiting for engagement. And when you and I and others can figure out how to connect what we do to space like that, we're going to have access to whole new people and opportunities. So I give you that that thought just to stimulate a different way of thinking about the moment that might uncover really dramatic new opportunities. Meanwhile, I know you all are struggling, and I just want to say how important what you do is, how vital it has been in my life and so many people around me. I thank you so much for this work that you do every day and for your good hearts and hands who are trying to figure it out. It's such worthy work. So thank you so much. And I know that you join me in thanking the Fetzer Institute for making possible this and collaborations like it to help build the spiritual foundation for a more loving world, which is what we are all about. Amen?
Amen.
So thanks to all of you, and thanks for the honor of letting me join you today.
Well, thank you so much, Sue. Yeah, that was amazing. Like Ben, I geeked out a little bit. I loved seeing this conversation and the questions of how do we apply this. Thank you so much for your time. Michelle, thank you for connecting us. Ben, thank you for opening this space. Next week, we will have another community call, and I think we can really lift this up and think about next week, which is, it's been a bit since we've talked about opening, reopening, re-entry into physical spaces. Some have started doing that, and we're hoping to have this time to glean messages, what's worked and what have been the greatest learnings in that next week. So again, it'll kind of go back to this content-based and what can we learn from each other, a bit of crosstalk as we reopen, renew, re-entry, whatever that word you feel comfortable with using, we will discuss next week. We'll also spend some time, there are many new faces popping in, so we'll do a reintroduction as well. So thank you all for the time you gave today, and we'll see you next week as well.
Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Great to see you all.
Bye.
Bye. Goodbye.
Bye, thanks everyone.